So we're going into part 4 of a series that just flowed very nicely out of our Galatians series. We're talking about this big theological word, atonement, which just literally means at one-ment. And what does this big theological term mean? It has to do with how did Jesus' death on the cross bring humanity and God together at one-ment? How did Jesus' death on the cross actually work to bring us and God together? And we've looked at some options. And what I've been showing you, many Christians, first of all, have no idea what this word means, but we all have ideas in our heads, a jumble of things we've heard on Sunday mornings throughout our church-going lives. We have a jumble of ideas, confused ideas in many cases, of how the cross works. And so in this series, what we're doing is we're kind of spelling out more clearly what are some of the historical doctrines of how the cross works. So two of the ones we've looked at so far is the penal substitution. Penal just comes from penalty. Penal substitution, which is the idea that Jesus had to die in order to pay God. That God, in his wrath, needed to punish someone, and therefore Jesus was the whipping boy for us. Many Christians have this one as a default. In fact, many Christians nowadays don't even realize there is another option to this. Another option that goes back to the early church is the ransom model, the pay Satan model, the idea that Satan had enslaved humanity and had ownership over humanity, and then Jesus' death somehow paid the ransom to Satan to set us free. But are there other options? And of course, as I've said throughout this series, I am very biased against, personally, number one, and I hope to show you guys healthier, better ways biblically to view the cross. But are there other options than these? And that's what we're going to look at today. But I have to start. To introduce a third option here today, I need to ask a question to get us started. And I want you to think about this for just a moment. I know where you're all going to land because I know how we think in our individualistic culture. But here's the question. Is humanity a single organism made up of billions of individual parts? So is humanity an interconnected single nature, single body, and each of us individuals is simply a member of this single whole? Or is humanity a collection of billions of separate individuals? Now, most of us, we come from an individualistic culture. The obvious answer is this bottom one. Of course, there's 8 billion human beings on earth. Of course, we're 8 billion different human beings. In fact, it's crazy to us to even think that this is a question. How could anybody think of humanity as a single organism? But that is simply because we are individualistic thinking people. So we see human beings as separate individuals. If we actually read the Bible, what we're going to find is much of the Bible does not make sense in the individualistic sense. Much of the Bible doesn't make sense until you realize that the Bible was written by people who think in a group or collective sense of culture. So let me show you this, okay? I want to show you, we're going to dive into an Old Testament story. The Bible is actually going to come alive to you here this morning because I'm going to show you that the writers of Scripture, these ancient writers, these ancient people, thought very differently about the world. We couldn't even imagine that there was such a perspective as this. So how many of you remember, I'd actually like to see a show of hands here, how many of you know or remember what the story of Achan is in the Old Testament? How many of you remember what that is? Whoa! Utter failure. We as a church have utterly failed. The story of Achan is, I was going to say, a somewhat famous story, but obviously it's incredibly obscure. It's a story from Joshua chapter 7, which follows right after Joshua chapter 6, which is a famous story. Okay, show of hands again. How many of you remember the story of Jericho? Okay, thank goodness. Now, Achan happens in the aftermath of Jericho. You need to know both stories to understand Achan. So let's just quickly review Jericho. Joshua chapter 6 is a story of Jericho. The Israelites finally cross the Jordan River and come into the promised land. And the first city they encounter is the city of Jericho, which has massive walls, and they have no chance of defeating it. So what does God tell them to do? God tells them, he says, you're going to have all the men and the priests are going to march around the city of Jericho once a day for 6 days. And then on the seventh day, they're going to march around the walls of Jericho 7 times. All right? And on the 7th time, the walls are going to come crumbling down. And that is just an epic picture. Thank you, ChatGPT. So they march around the wall 7 times on the 7th day, and the walls come crumbling down. Now, of course, the men rush in, the army rushes in, and they conquer the city. But we have to know, and this is important for the Achan story, is Joshua gave the Israelite soldiers very clear instructions about something. And this is what he told them. He said, no loot. I've been looking forward to saying that word all week. And over the next 5 minutes, while we talk about the story, I'm going to say the word loot as many times as I possibly can. No loot. So the city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. So all the loot is going to be collected by the priests and given into the treasury of the tabernacle. Now, of course, in ancient times, this would have been a huge deal. Like, we look at it and go, okay, so what? No loot. In ancient times, this was your motivation to fight. All the little peons that are getting sent in to risk their lives to fight, how you paid them was they got a cut of the loot they found and took. So the moment you make a rule that says no loot, there's going to be temptation. And so, after the Joshua story is over, the very first verse, after the Jericho story is over, the very first verse of chapter 7, we have a problem. But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. Now, the Israelites, plural, makes us think, well, the entire army was a bunch of greedy, loot-seeking pirates who wanted gold and silver. Of course they did. They were poor, but they were they didn't listen. So the Israelites were unfaithful. So the fact that the whole group is implicated means it must have been most of the soldiers, because it kind of implicates the whole group. Well, let's keep reading to see if that's true. What? Achan, son of Carmi of the tribe of Judah, took some of them. Wait, what? Huh? The Israelites were unfaithful? That doesn't look like Israelites plural to me. That doesn't look like Israelites plural to me. One guy took stuff. I'm going to tell you right now, if I'm Joshua, say you high school students, when you take a test, if you have 99.9% on the test, is that a good mark or a bad mark? Good. 99.9% of the, let's say if there was 1,000 soldiers, I don't know, who knows, we don't know. But let's say there was 1,000 and only one took them. Literally, that is a 99.9% success rate. If I'm Joshua, I'm giving the guys a gold star. Only one guy. But here, one guy messing up makes them say all of Israel was unfaithful. I don't know about you, but I think that is deeply, deeply unfair. Well, let's keep reading. Right? So, what's going to happen as a result of this? Well, so the Lord's anger burned against, obviously it's just Achan. He's the only one that messed up. And again, why is God even mad? Any parent, if your kid comes home with a 99.9 and you get mad at them, I'm going to tell you right now, you're a bad parent. Some of you would just be happy with a 69 or 70. Some of you would be happy with a 51. But if you're upset at a 99.9, your expectations are way too high, and you should be paying for your kids' therapy after they're 18 years old. So the Lord's anger burned against, but clearly he's not going to be mad at all of them if only one of them did it. So let's keep reading here. Oh my goodness. What? Achan, one person. Achan did it. 99.9% of them did the right thing. It says here that God's wrath is against all of Israel. In what world is this fair? Now, any of those of us who have at any point in our lives read this story, when I put it in these terms, of course, we all agree this is deeply unfair and disturbing and gross. However, many of us have read this story before and never thought that, and that's because we have a protection button on our brains that doesn't allow us to think dangerous thoughts like that when we read the Bible. So we read stories like this and we just go, well, he just must have had a reason. I mean, he's just so good. God is so good that if one person does something, he gets mad at everybody. That's how good he is? Is that a good person? Are you a good parent? Let's say you have 4 kids. One of your kids does something bad, and the rest of them do everything right. If you get mad at all 4 of them, good parent or bad parent? A show of hands for good parent. I am terrified to be a child in this congregation. Oh no, you're right. Wait, I got confused there. Thank you for getting that right. Some of you are going to go away from here very confused. I'm supposed to be bad. No. Okay, show of hands now again. Now help me out on this one. How many of you think you're a bad parent if you get mad at all 4 for what one does? Yes, thank you. Thank you. Phew, you're good parents. Some of you. Wow. And yet, we read this Bible. We all agree that's true. And yet, when we read it in the Bible, our safety button says, don't question that. It's got to be okay. God's just such a good parent. He gets mad at everybody. That's not good. But what's going on here? Well, what's crazy to me is Joshua, that we all agree, God getting mad at everyone for what one person does is not fair. What's crazy to me is that never enters Joshua's mind. Joshua never once questions in this passage, in this story, whether this is fair or not, which shows us his mindset. It just makes sense to him. Everybody in this story seems to think this makes sense. So God tells them in the morning, present yourselves tribe by tribe. So God gives them an idea. He says, you're going to cast lots, which, if you don't know what cast lots is, whenever you run into that in the Bible, in our modern day, just think of throwing dice. So God says, essentially, in the morning, you're going to find out who the one person is that's gotten you all into trouble. And you're going to do it by throwing dice. So you're going to pull out all the leaders of the 12 tribes. You're going to throw dice. Whichever leader's number comes up, that's the tribe. You're going to call out all, and that's what it means the Lord chooses, right? It wasn't like God was speaking to them with an audible voice in this story. It's that they're throwing lots. They're throwing dice. Whichever one the Lord chooses, so whichever one the dice comes up, shall come forward clan by clan. So now, when you pick which tribe it is, now you're going to take all the leaders of the clans from those tribes, you're going to bring them together, you're going to throw dice again. Whichever clan the dice comes up for, that's the one God chose. Now you're going to bring out all the families. And you're going to call them all family by family, you're going to throw dice again. Whichever family gets picked, that's the one the Lord chooses. And then you're going to throw dice, and you're going to find man by man. So right from the beginning, Joshua and the leaders know one guy messed it up for everybody. And he doesn't. If that happened here, my first thing to God would be, this is not fair. This is weird. Like, punish the guy who caused the problem. Don't punish everybody else. Joshua does not even ask that, and I'll tell you why. It's because in their culture, this actually makes sense. See, in ancient, and by the way, there are cultures still like this today. In some Asian cultures, like we in the West have a very individual, by the way, don't hear me when I say individualistic versus group. I'm not saying one is good and one is bad. Individualistic cultures have some good things and they have some bad things. Group-centered cultures have some good things and they have some bad things. These are just very different ways of viewing the world. In our individualistic world, this doesn't even make sense to us. I get in trouble only for things I do, and I get rewarded for things I do. I don't get rewarded for something someone else does. I don't get punished for something someone else does. But in a group-centered culture, the group is viewed sort of like a single body, and each individual within the group is viewed as a member of that body. Kind of like I have a body. Okay, so here's an example. I like to play ping pong. And I like to think I'm okay as long as I don't play too high a level of player. So I'm right-handed when I play ping pong. Now when I play ping pong right-handed and I win a game, let's say against my youngest son, Boaz, we like to play a lot of ping pong. If I win, people don't say, oh, your right hand is so good at ping pong. They say, you are good at ping pong. If I lose or play poorly, we don't say, oh, my right hand stinks at ping pong. We say, you or I stink at ping pong. Because what the member does is what the whole body does. If you do something wrong, if you punch someone for no reason, let's say you're left-handed, let's switch to the left. If you punch someone for no reason with your left hand, they don't say, well, we're going to have to punish your left hand. They say, we're going to have to punish you. You did it. It's not just a member. Because a member is part of the body, what the member does is part of what the whole body does. That's how group-centered cultures think. More like that. All right? So in a group-centered culture, like in ancient Israel, the whole nation of Israel is seen as an interconnected body. And what one member does can bring shame on the whole group. Or what one member does can bring honor to the whole group. So just a quick little comparison. Individualistic cultures versus group-centered cultures. And again, the point here is not one is better, one is worse. Each one has good things, each one has bad things. Individualistic cultures, something I personally like, but of course is what I live in, failure and success are individual and personal. My failure is mine, my success is mine. In a group-centered culture, you have all of this shame and honor stuff. And if one person shames the bigger group, actually sometimes the group, now this is a downside to group-centered culture, then the entire group can be very vicious to the individual within the group that brought shame to everyone. By the way, just a little bit, I sometimes like to just kind of educate things that go on around the world. One of the most horrific aspects of group-centered cultures, one of the downsides, is what's called honor killings, almost all of which are done to women, but in some group-centered cultures around the world, if a woman brings shame in some way or is seen to have brought shame in some way to a family, the brothers, the dad can be included, the brothers, the cousins, the male cousins, whatever, will kill the woman to save the honor of the group because they all feel shame. This happens somewhere to about 5,000 to 20,000 women every year still today. It's a horrible thing. And it makes no sense to us. Now again, it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. I hate to say it makes sense. It doesn't make sense. It's horrible, horrible, horrible. But you can see how in a group culture, one person's actions are taken personally by the group. In an individualistic culture, moral responsibility, each person is only accountable for themselves. In a group-centered culture, moral responsibility is shared by the group. By the way, are you starting to see, we can't even imagine a culture like this, but are you starting to see where this story is going? And actually, this is a huge chunk of the Bible. So what happens next in Joshua 7? Well, let's finish this story, and then we're going to bring it around to the cross. What does this have to do with the cross? Because actually this is going to make a lot of sense of some very weird-looking passages in Paul's writings. But let's finish the story in Joshua 7. Joshua said, why have you, one person, Achan, brought this trouble on us. Totally makes sense if you're in a group-centered culture. The Lord will bring trouble on you today. And now we get what is essentially an honor killing in the Old Testament. It's actually very disturbing. Because they don't just kill. In the same way that Achan's sin impacted all of Israel, they don't just punish Achan because he is seen as representative of his entire family. So what happens next is very disturbing, and it should disturb us. And we should not flick the safety switch in our brains to say, oh, yeah, this is the Bible, so it must be okay. It's actually disturbing. Then Joshua, together with all Israel, took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, he'd hidden all this stuff under his tent, his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys, and sheep, even the animals, his tent and all that he had to the valley of Achor. Then all Israel stoned him, and after they had stoned the rest, including the sons and daughters, they burned them. Now, again, the safety switch we Christians flick is, we say, well, God's character is just so good, he gets mad at everybody. People. By getting more and more good, your actions do not become more and more evil. A good God does not kill children for the sins of their parents. In fact, I can prove this to you because later in the Old Testament, God actually tells this to the prophets. As time goes on, as the Israelites discover more of who God is, and he reveals his character more and more to them, he tells people like Ezekiel, and this isn't the only place, but he tells the prophets, he says, I have never been like that. Look what he says to Ezekiel. So I just have to do this to defend God's character here for just a moment. Later, Israel discovered God isn't like that. Here's what he says to Ezekiel. This is many centuries later. The one who sins is the one who will die. By the way, direct contradiction to what happens in Joshua 7. Look what he says next. The child will not share the guilt of the parent, nor will the parent share the guilt of the child. Again, direct contradiction with Joshua 7. The righteousness of the righteous will be credited to them, and the wickedness of the wicked will be charged against them. And they say, what's going on here? Did God change? No. What happened is, this is something we talk about often here, accommodation. Primitive Israel, the people are changing. Primitive Israel, this is all part of the journey that's going to end in Jesus, the ultimate 100% revelation of who God is. So on that journey, God is revealing more and more of himself, and it's going to peak at Jesus. As time goes on and as God reveals more and more of himself, they finally come to realize as he reveals himself to them by his Holy Spirit, wait a minute, that's not God. Now you say, oh, okay, well after this, all of Israel became an individualistic culture. No, first of all, that's not the point. Individualistic culture isn't better. Certainly the honor killings piece is a bad piece. And there's more of a balance. What is happening here is God's bringing a balance into a group-centered culture. It's still a group-centered culture. I could show you story after story, but even the New Testament. In the New Testament, you'll notice something, and then we're going to jump into Romans. But in the New Testament, you'll notice that often when a guy gets saved, he doesn't get saved by himself. This is in Philippi. Paul and Silas are witnessing to the Philippian jailer. And they tell him, so they witness, and he's just about to give his life to the Lord, and they say, believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved. Oh yeah, classic. Individualistic culture? Yeah, boom. You believe, you get saved. Look what they say next. You and your what? You and your what? Household. Of course, because in a group culture, of course they're going together. If the man switches gods, the whole household, of course, is coming with them. You don't have to spend time doing an alpha course with each one and still trying to win them and so on. Of course, they're all just going to come together. It's a group thing. And you'll see this in the New Testament as well. So you say, what does this have to do with atonement? And how Jesus Death on the cross saves us. Well, now I'm going to take you to, theologically, a very famous passage. It's been debated for 2,000 years. From Romans chapter 5. And it's Paul explaining atonement. How does Jesus' death on the cross save us? And I want you, when we look at this chapter from a group culture perspective, I want you to see this whole thing is just going to go like, what? And it's just going to fall into place, right? So let's go to Romans 5. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through how many people? One man, Adam, right? So one man. I like that Paul doesn't blame Eve here. Just as sin entered the world through one man and death through sin, and in this way death came to how many people? Oh, what? That's not fair. No, it isn't fair. And from an individualistic perspective like we do, now this is where Christians get weird because we take our, I shouldn't really do this rabbit trail, but I gotta. Okay, it's a little rabbit trail. Let's talk about speculation for just a moment. Let's see if I can do this in 3 minutes. Because we're individualistic, it just does not make sense to us. How does one man's sin make all of us die? Not fair. So, modern individualistic thinking Christians have to come up with a scientific reason how one man's sin can affect everybody. So this is where you get modern Christians doing weird riffs on what's called original sin. And basically what happens is Adam sinned, and again, this is scientific thinking applied to ancient texts to people who did not think in terms of science and genetics. But now we got to think, well, how did Adam's sin affect me? Because we're each separate individuals. So how would it affect me? Well, it must be something borderline genetic. It must be heritable. It must be like Adam sinned, and then sin and death just kind of broke something inside of them, and now when they had babies, they had sinful, dying babies. And this is why we all have to be physically, literally descended genetically from Adam and Eve, because otherwise we would not inherit original sin. All right. All of that kind of thinking about inheriting sin in some kind of biological way, having to literally be genetically related altogether, is modern individualistic thinking imposed on a very ancient text of someone who did not think about genetics, but they had no concept of what that is. And by the way, I can show you that it has problems. So let me just debunk scientific thinking about this, individualistic thinking, and just with a couple of, potential, what do you, I'm missing the word, but anyway, kind of just a pretend situation. Because what that would mean is, if you could create a human being who wasn't related to Adam, that human being would be born immortal and without a sin nature. Okay, well, let's think about that. We're actually not, it's potential. Let's say 50 years, I'm not saying it's a good thing. Terrifies me. Let's say we have the technology, 50 or 100 years from now, let's say. Scientists figure out how to make a human being in a test tube from scratch that isn't related to other human beings. Literally, we know what the DNA molecule looks like. We mapped the human genome 20 years ago. It's not out of the question that, 50 years from now or 100 years from now, scientists could figure out how to make a human being from scratch in a test tube. If this is talking about physical inheritance, we had to physically inherit sin and brokenness and death from Adam, then scientists who would create a test tube baby not related to Adam, those babies would be born immortal. And they wouldn't have a sin nature. In which case, sign me up. Like, sign me up for 3 or 4 of them. I'll raise another bunch of kids. Some of you parents is like, I would trade them in right now. I'm trading in the Adam ones for the non-Adam ones. Or if we, dare to speculate some more, if we encountered intelligent life in the universe, it's very vast, I'm not saying it's there, Many Christians are afraid to even think about these things. There's nothing in the Bible that says there's not. If we encountered intelligent life, that life would not be related to Adam. Therefore, are we going to run into intelligent life that lives forever and never does anything wrong? No. I'm going to tell you why. Everything in this universe, that's just how the laws of physics work. We die. Things don't live forever in this universe. Therefore, what Paul is talking about here is not Adam sinned, something changed in his genetics, and they started having weird, broken, dying babies. This has to do, and we should be taking this much more like a group culture would, metaphorically. It's the same way one person can do something shameful and the whole group feels the shame. In the same way, Paul is using a metaphor for people in a group culture, that Adam's sin somehow spread shame to the whole group, that we're all impacted in some way. Now, the good side of this is, for those of you whose brains haven't completely shut off just right now and are thinking, I got to run. By the way, I lost it many minutes ago. Let's go. Now, the flip side. There we go. Flip side. The flip side of this is, if one man can bring shame to everybody in a group-centered way of thinking, one man can also fix things for everybody. But the gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died by the trespass of the one man, how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many? Paul, looking through a group-centered Christian lens, sees Jesus as a second Adam, all right? This is going towards a third atonement theory, how the cross works. That Adam, in a group-centered culture, by him sinning, death encompassed the whole body because it's one piece. If I poison, if a snake bites me in the leg and I get poison in my leg, it's not just my leg that's in trouble, I'm in trouble. That's how a group culture thinks. So poison got in through Adam, all of humanity is affected. But in the same way, one man can also bring the cure, which is why, in this way of looking at things, Jesus had to become human. Because by literally becoming human, he becomes a part of the body. And by becoming a part of the body, if the antidote to the poison is in that part of the body, it spreads to the whole body, and the whole body is saved. That's how Romans 5 works. And he's just going to repeat this. You go and read it in your devotions this week. He's going to repeat this over and over and over again throughout this passage. Consequently, just as one trespass resulted in condemnation for all people, poison got in through one part of the body and it affected us all, so also one righteous act resulted in justification and life for all people. By the way, if you go back historically, this passage is key. I often tell you guys how there's 45,000 different Christian denominations in the world right now. And it goes up by about 1,000 denominations every year. So I'm actually at a date already, we're probably over 46,000. The awesome thing is we're all going to be in heaven. And if there's over 46,000, it means none of us were right. Some of us are going to be more wrong. I'm just hoping to get Crossview to just over average. You guys were only 49% wrong. Woohoo! There's a stream of Christian thought that's been around for 2,000 years. Again, most Christians today, particularly in this area, just don't know it's even an option that's ever been there. But there's a whole group of Christians for 2,000 years who have a doctrine called universalism. And of course, many other Christians, because there's 46,000 plus denominations, disagree with them. But universalists believe that in the end, Jesus is going to literally end up saving all people. Now, I personally count myself as a hopeful universalist. I would be so happy if universalism ended up being true. Funny thing is, some Christians would end up being mad, which is a very odd thing, but this passage is hugely key for them. See, Christian universalists believe if you just follow the logic of this passage, look what it says. One trespass. Adam's disobedience affected how many human beings? Some or all? All. What if you don't believe in Adam? Are you still affected by Adam's decision? Every human being who was ever born is affected by Adam's decision. Interesting. Well, that's what it says. One trespass resulted in condemnation for all people. But actually in this passage, if you're only going by this passage, the logic goes the same both ways. So also one righteous act resulted in justification and life for all people. For universalists, for 2,000 years, Romans 5 has been a huge part of the pillar of why they believe what they believe. And again, there's reasons why Christians often disagree with them. But this is where that stems from. Jesus, one act of obedience in group culture, if you put the antidote in one part of the body, the whole body gets fixed. It's a powerful picture. So, one more verse and then we're going to wrap this up. For just as through the disobedience of the one man, the many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of the one man, the many will be made righteous. That's Romans 5. So now we have a third atonement theory. And this one is hard to pin down. It is called and has been called many different names throughout history. I'm going to call it reversal or second Adam theory. And it's the idea, not that Jesus, in this theory, the idea is not, oh, God needed to, he's just so angry at sin, he just needs to beat someone. So Jesus went and God beat him, so now he doesn't have to beat the rest of us. In this theory, it has nothing to do with that. In this theory, Jesus saves humanity by reversing Adam's failure and death. In this theory, Adam introduced poison into the whole body. Jesus, by becoming human being, makes himself one with the human body and thus brings the antidote for humanity. Now, you don't have to be a universalist to believe this. You could just believe it affects only Christians or whatever. So many non-universalists and universalists go this way. But the idea is Adam disobeyed, but Jesus obeyed. So anytime you hear a preacher talking about Jesus obeyed on our behalf, that's a piece of second Adam reversal theory. Jesus lived a right life so we could be considered righteous. Most of us have heard that in church. That's part of second Adam reversal theory. And then Jesus died in the same way Adam died, bringing death to the whole human body. Jesus rose from the dead, bringing life to all. So, we can put this in now. Oh, but I should just show you church fathers, because I've been showing you one of the things, if you're new here, one of the things I regularly say here at Crossview is, if I tell you something new, it's wrong. If I'm, after 2,000 years of Christian history, if I'm coming up with brand new stuff that no Christian has thought about yet, it's not in the Bible, it's some random new thing. 46,000 denominations out there and counting, we're each going to have to be in a stream. We're all heading to heaven. Jesus has saved us all. But we're all in a stream. I'm in a stream. We're in a stream. Irenaeus from the 2nd century was the first one who came up with, kind of put into words reversal, second Adam theory. But here's a great quote from Gregory of Nyssa in the 4th century. He says this, just in the same way as in the instance of this body of ours, the operation of one of the organs of sense is felt at once by the whole system. Ancient people, lots of them saw humanity as one body. We're all connected. We're just pieces of this one human nature. As one with that member, so also the resurrection principle of this member, capital M, because he's talking about Jesus. The resurrection principle in Jesus, the one member, when he became human, he joined this one human nature body as though the whole of mankind was a single living being, passes through the entire race. So resurrection power, Once Jesus resurrects from the dead and he's become part of humanity, resurrection power passes through the entire race, being imparted from the member, that's Jesus, to the whole by virtue of the continuity and oneness of human nature. This goes back 2,000 years. Goes back 2,000 years. Let's make this, start to put this into, there should be a question mark here. I'm going to tie all of these things together next week. Right now, we're just prayerfully considering these things. We have 3 different categories of atonement theories that we've looked at. One category is the penalty substitution, penal substitution. God needed to punish someone. I've told you many times. Many churches in this area and many evangelical churches in North America are heavy on penal substitution. I don't mind saying, personally, I'm not one of those people. I think this one is a deeply unhealthy picture of God, and that's why I think it's important how we think about atonement. It deeply impacts how you think about God and how you think about human beings. It'll impact your whole walk with Jesus. So there's a second category, and there's different ones within there. There's the pay Satan model. It's Satan owned humanity, so Jesus' death was a ransom payment to free us. And then there's a third category of atonement theories, which is the second Adam. And there's different ones underneath this one too. But there's the second Adam reversal theory, which is Adam messed it up for the whole connected human body. Jesus connects himself by becoming human and gives us the antidote by living. We get to experience the honor of his perfect life and the life of his resurrection because we're part of that one human body. Jesus heals humanity by reversing Adam. There's so much stuff I want to say, but we're going to leave it there for now. I want you to bow your heads with me and close your eyes. Next week, we'll start to sew these things up. Biggest reason I'm doing this is because heads bowed, eyes closed. Biggest reason I'm doing this series is because I want Christians to know that they're not trapped into believing God is a wrathful, essentially abusive father. When 1 John says that God is love, that extends to the cross, to the Old Testament, to everything God has ever done. When Jesus died on the cross and said, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do, that's how God always treats his enemies. Always. Father, I pray by your Spirit, you would break down the unhealthy ruts in our minds of how we think about you and how much you love us and how you relate to humanity. Thank you, Jesus, for your love. Thank you for 2,000 years of church history and the way Jesus-loving thinkers have worked to help us understand what you did at the cross. I pray for everyone here today to have kind of a letting go of the fear and anxiety that many of us have about you. In Jesus' name we pray. And all God's people said, Amen.